Cyan walked through the towering crystal streets of Urath, her long shadow stretching over the smooth blue pavement. Around her, the other Eurythians moved in perfect harmony, their shorter frames blending into the flow of society. She stood out, not just in height, but in everything. Too tall, too different, too wrong. She kept her head down, trying to ignore the quiet whispers as she passed. Her people were not cruel, but they were firm in their beliefs. Eurathians were meant to be small, compact, strong. That was what their ancestors valued. That was what made them fit for survival. But Cyan was none of those things. At home, she had tried to be like everyone else. She studied hard, she followed the rules, and she contributed to her city. Yet, no matter what she did, one fact remained: she would never be chosen. In Eurathian culture, reproduction was a duty, not a personal choice. Their species had strict genetic guidelines. The council decided which pairs were the best match, ensuring strong and balanced offspring. Mating outside of these guidelines was unheard of. Cyan had never been selected. She was healthy, intelligent, and skilled in engineering, but her height made her an outlier. According to Eurathian science, tall figures like hers would weaken the next generation. No one wanted to bond with someone who could not contribute to the future of their species. She had accepted this reality long ago. But that did not make it easier. A new arrival. The skies above Urath shimmered as a silver human vessel descended onto the landing platform. Cyan stood among the crowd, watching as the ship's doors opened. It was rare for humans to visit. Relations between Urath and Earth were friendly, but their species had little reason to interact beyond trade and diplomacy. A tall human stepped forward, his boots making a dull thud against the platform. He was dressed in the standard uniform of a diplomatic officer, simple but efficient. His posture was relaxed, his expression open. He scanned the crowd with curiosity before his eyes landed on Cyan. Unlike her own people, he did not look away. His gaze lingered, not with the usual pity or confusion, but with interest. Cyan shifted uncomfortably. She was used to being ignored. This was new. The council leader stepped forward to greet the human. "Welcome, Mark of Earth." The human smiled. "Thank you for having me." His voice was warm, confident. He glanced at the gathered Eurathians, then back at Cyan. She stiffened. "Is this gathering part of a tradition?" he asked. The leader tilted his head. "They have come to witness your arrival." Mark nodded. Then, much to Cyan's horror, he walked toward her. The crowd whispered as he stopped a few feet away. "Hello," he said. She hesitated. No one usually spoke to her first. "Hello," she replied quietly. "I'm Mark," he said, offering his hand in the human way. She stared at it, unsure what to do. Eurathians did not greet each other with physical contact. The leader stepped in. "She is Cyan, one of our engineers." Mark withdrew his hand, but his interest remained. "An engineer? That's impressive." Cyan blinked. Was he serious? No one had ever called her impressive before. She did not know how to respond. The leader, sensing the awkwardness, continued with formalities. But Mark kept glancing at Cyan, as if she was something unexpected, something worth noticing. And for the first time in her life, Cyan felt seen. Cyan sat alone in the great hall of Urath's central dome, her long legs folded beneath the polished crystal table. Around her, the other Eurythians spoke in hushed voices, their small frames moving gracefully as they interacted. It was a formal gathering, one meant to welcome the human diplomat, Mark. She had not planned to attend, but her mentor insisted. "You are an engineer, Cyan. Your work helps maintain the city's systems. You should be here." But she knew the truth. No one wanted her here. No one wanted her anywhere. She picked at the small plate of nutrient cubes in front of her, barely listening to the conversation around her. Every so often, she could feel their eyes, curious, questioning, judging. It was always the same. Then something unusual happened. A shadow moved across the table, and she looked up. Mark, the human, was walking toward her. The whispers around the hall grew louder. Cyan's chest tightened. Why was he coming to her? No one ever did. Mark stopped a few feet away and smiled. "Do you mind if I sit here?" She hesitated, glancing around. The other Eurethians had turned away, pretending not to watch. No one would stop him, but no one would approve either. "You may sit," she said quietly. Mark lowered himself onto the bench across from her. He was taller than most Eurethians, though still shorter than her. His expression was open, relaxed. He seemed completely unaware of the tension in the room. "I noticed you earlier," he said. "At the landing site." Cyan kept her hands in her lap. "Yes. I wanted to talk to you, but I think I made things awkward." He chuckled. "I don't know much about your customs yet." She studied him, confused. Why was he speaking to her? Did he not understand? No one spoke to her unless necessary. "You are a diplomat," she said cautiously. "You will learn." He nodded. "I hope so. But honestly, I just wanted to talk to you. You stand out." A bitter feeling rose in her chest. Of course, she stood out. That was the problem. "I know," she murmured, looking away. Mark frowned slightly. "I meant it as a good thing." She blinked. "Good?" "Yes," he said simply. "You're taller than the others. Stronger. It's different, but different isn't bad." She stared at him, unsure how to respond. No one had ever spoken about her height in that way before. Among her people, it was a flaw. Something to be hidden, to be ashamed of. But this human, he did not seem to see it that way. Mark picked up a nutrient cube from the plate and examined it. "These are interesting. What do they taste like?" "Like food," she said automatically. He laughed, and to her surprise, she felt the corner of her lips twitch, almost like a smile. "Fair enough," he said. "I suppose I should have expected that answer." Cheyenne watched him curiously. He was different from what she expected. Most aliens who visited Urath kept their distance. They were polite but formal. Mark was casual, friendly. "Your people do not usually interact with mine," she said carefully. He nodded. "Yeah, I noticed, but I don't like following rules that don't make sense." She tilted her head. "Rules are important. They help society function." "Sure," Mark said, "but sometimes they stop people from seeing things in new ways." Cheyenne had no response to that. She had never considered questioning the rules before. The idea felt strange. Before she could say anything else, a low chime rang through the hall, signaling the start of the formal address. The Eurathian leader stood, calling for silence. Mark leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "I hope we can talk again." Then he straightened, turning his attention to the speaker. Cyan sat frozen, unsure of what had just happened. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her as if she was worth knowing. And for the first time, she felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Cyan walked through the quiet corridors of the engineering sector, her long fingers gliding over the smooth control panels. It was late, and most workers had already left. She preferred it this way. No whispers, no stares, no reminders that she did not belong. Her mind, however, was not on her work. She kept thinking about the human. Mark. His words repeated in her head. Different isn't bad. It was such a simple statement, yet it felt completely foreign. She had spent her whole life being told that her differences made her less, but Mark had looked at her as if they made her more. Why? Why did he see something that her own people could not? The soft hum of the control panels filled the room as she adjusted the energy readings for the city's transport grid. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting. A sound behind her made her turn. Mark stood in the doorway. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. Cyan straightened. "No, but you should not be here. This is a restricted area." Mark held up his hands. "Don't worry. Your leader gave me access. Something about learning how your technology works." He grinned. "I think he just wanted to keep me busy." Cyan tilted her head. You are a diplomat. Should you not be in meetings? I was, Mark said, stepping inside. But honestly, they're kind of boring. Science stared at him. No Eurathian would ever say such a thing. Meetings were important. Orders were important. Structure was important. But Mark did not seem to care about any of that. He walked over to one of the control panels and studied it. So this runs your transport system. She nodded. It regulates energy flow to the city's transit pods. Mark whistled softly. Impressive. And you manage this? Yes. He smiled. You must be one of the smartest people here. Cheyenne hesitated. No one had ever called her that before. Her people valued her work, but they never praised her. They never saw her as special. She lowered her gaze. I am only doing my duty. Mark leaned against the panel. You know, back on Earth, being tall is actually a good thing. She blinked. What? Yeah, he continued. Humans see height as a sign of strength. Leaders, athletes, scientists, some of the most respected people on Earth are tall. Science struggled to process this information. Could that be true? Could there really be a place where her height was not seen as a flaw? That is strange, she admitted. Mark shrugged. Maybe. But it's all about perspective. Cheyenne remained silent, unsure what to say. Mark studied her for a moment, then said, Can I ask you something? She hesitated, then nodded. Do you want to stay here forever? Her chest tightened. This is my home. I know, Mark said gently. But is it where you want to be? Cheyenne opened her mouth, then closed it. No one had ever asked her that before. It had never been a question. She was meant to stay here. But now, for the first time, she wondered if that was really her choice. Mark smiled. Think about it. Then, without another word, he turned and left. Science stood alone in the dim light, her mind filled with thoughts she had never dared to have before. Science stood in the great hall, watching the council chamber's central screen. Rows of Eurathian elders sat before it, their expressions calm and unreadable. The image on the screen displayed a new research proposal, one that had already caused whispers throughout the city. A genetic compatibility experiment. For centuries, Eurathians had followed strict biological rules when selecting mates. Only those with the most ideal traits were allowed to bond. Those who did not meet the standards, like Cyan, were left without a choice. But the experiment was something new. It was part of an interspecies research program between Earth and Eurath. The goal? To see if human and Eurathian DNA could combine to create viable offspring. Cyan's heart pounded. She should not care about such things. It was a scientific study, nothing more. But still, a part of her wondered, was this her only chance? A low chime sounded, signaling the end of the council's discussion. The lead elder turned to the assembled citizens. We require volunteers, he announced. Any Eurathian willing to participate in the study may come forward. The hall fell silent. Cyan looked around, but no one moved. Of course they wouldn't. Why would they? Eurathians believed in purity. They would never risk such an experiment. Then, to Cyan's shock, a voice spoke. I volunteer. Heads turned. A murmur spread through the crowd. Cyan's breath caught. Mark stepped forward. The council leader tilted his head. You are human. Your participation is expected. I know, Mark said. Then he glanced toward Cyan. But I'd like to choose my partner. Silence filled the room. Cyan felt her body freeze. No one had ever chosen her before. No one had ever wanted to. Mark turned to her, his expression calm but certain. Cyan, he said, will you join me in this? She could feel the weight of every stare in the room. She knew what they were thinking. That it was pointless. That she was useless. That she had no right to stand there. But Mark was different. He didn't see her as weak. He didn't see her as unworthy. He saw her. Cyan took a deep breath. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. I will, she said. The hall erupted into whispers. But she ignored them. For the first time in her life, she was making a choice. And it felt right. Cyan sat in the sterile research chamber, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. The smooth metal walls reflected the soft glow of the overhead lights, making the room feel even colder than it was. She had spent many hours in laboratories before, checking energy systems, reviewing mechanical designs. But this was different. This time, she was the subject of study. Across from her, Mark leaned back in his chair, looking completely at ease. He had been in this room for over an hour already, answering questions from the Eurathian scientists. Now, it was her turn. A thin Eurathian researcher stood in front of them, holding a data tablet. "We will begin with genetic comparisons," he said, his voice calm and professional. "The goal is to analyze compatibility between our species." Cyan gave a small nod, but inside, she was filled with doubt. Was this truly possible? Eurathians had always believed their genetics were too different from other species. If the study failed, it would only confirm what her people already thought. She was not meant to bond, not even with an outsider. She risked a glance at Mark. Unlike her, he showed no hesitation. His confidence unsettled her. Did he really believe this experiment could succeed? The researcher continued speaking. "Your biological structures share some similarities," he explained, "but there are key differences. Human DNA is highly adaptable, which makes this study worth pursuing." Cyan tilted her head. "Adaptable?" Mark nodded. "Yeah, humans are pretty good at adjusting to new things. It's kind of our thing." He grinned. "Survival through flexibility." Cyan considered that. Her people valued stability, not change. It was why their society had remained the same for generations. Perhaps that was why she had always felt like an outsider, because she did not fit in a world that refused to bend. The researcher continued. "To proceed, we need to conduct further tests, physical assessments, neural scans, and controlled interaction sessions." Cyan tensed. Controlled interaction. That sounded personal. Mark, however, did not seem bothered. "Fine by me," he said. Then he glanced at Cyan. "You all right with this?" She hesitated. This experiment was not just about science. It was about her. About proving whether she had a place, not just in Eurathian society, but in the universe itself. "Yes," she said finally. The researcher nodded. "Very well. We will begin tomorrow." As Cyan left the chamber, Mark walked beside her. "You seem nervous," he said. She glanced at him. "This is new." "Yeah," Mark agreed. "But new things aren't always bad." Cyan did not answer. She wasn't sure if he was right, but she wanted to believe he was. Cyan stood in the research chamber once again. This time, she was not alone. Mark sat across from her, his expression relaxed as always. The researchers moved around them, preparing the next phase of the experiment. Machines hummed softly, displaying complex biological data on glowing screens. "This will be a controlled interaction session," the lead researcher announced. "The goal is to observe emotional and physical compatibility between you and the human." Cyan swallowed. She had expected genetic tests and physical assessments, but this was different. Emotional compatibility. That was something she had never considered before. Mark leaned forward slightly. "So what exactly do we have to do?" The researcher gestured to a small platform in the center of the room. "Stand there. We will monitor your physiological responses to close interaction." Mark grinned. "So, basically, we just talk and see what happens." The researcher nodded. Cyan hesitated. Talking was simple. She had spoken to Mark before. But now, with the researchers watching, it felt different. Still, she stepped onto the platform. Mark joined her. "All right," he said. "I'll go first. What's your favorite thing about your world?" Cyan blinked, caught off guard by the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "The sky," she said slowly. "At night, it glows with shifting colors." Mark's eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing. I'd love to see it. She tilted her head. Your planet does not have such skies. We have auroras in some places, he said, but not everywhere. Cheyenne had never considered that before. She had spent so much time feeling like she did not belong here. She had never thought that her world might hold wonders that others did not have. The researcher cleared his throat. Please step closer. Cheyenne stiffened. Closer. Mark, however, took a step toward her without hesitation. He was only inches away now, close enough that she could see the details in his strange, rounded face. His eyes were steady, his posture relaxed. You're nervous, he observed. She kept her gaze forward. I am not used to this. Mark nodded. I get it. But hey, if it helps, I don't mind being the one who makes things awkward. She gave him a confused look. Why would you want to be awkward? He chuckled. Because it makes people laugh. And laughing makes things easier. Cheyenne considered that. Her people did not laugh much, not in the way humans did. But she had seen Mark smile often, even in situations where most Eurathians would be silent. Perhaps he was right. The researcher watched the monitor. Heart rates remained stable. No signs of stress. Cheyenne frowned. She had been certain she was stressed. But as she stood there, something shifted inside her. She was still nervous, but not uncomfortable. Mark was not judging her. He was not whispering behind her back. He was simply there. And for once, she did not feel like an outsider. The researcher nodded. This is promising. We will continue observation. As the session ended, Cheyenne and Mark stepped down from the platform. Mark turned to her with a smile. See, that wasn't so bad. Cheyenne met his gaze, a strange warmth spreading in her chest. No, she admitted. It was not. For the first time, she wondered if this experiment was not just about science. Maybe it was about something more. The research chamber was silent except for the soft hum of the machines. Cheyenne stood beside Mark, her tall frame relaxed in a way she had never felt before. The experiment had progressed beyond simple tests. Now, it was about trust. The researchers had gathered the data they needed, but something unexpected had happened. Cheyenne had changed. She no longer avoided the curious stares of her people. She no longer shrank under the weight of their expectations. For the first time, she felt seen, not as a mistake, but as herself. And Mark had been the reason for that. The lead researcher stepped forward, holding a data tablet. After extensive analysis, we have reached a conclusion. Cheyenne held her breath. The elder continued. Human and Eurathian DNA are compatible. The experiment is a success. A murmur spread through the room. Some Eurathians looked surprised. Others seemed uncertain. Cheyenne could see the shift in their eyes. This changed everything. For centuries, her people had believed that only those with the ideal traits were worthy of continuing their lineage. But this experiment had proven that there were other possibilities. Mark grinned. So, does this mean I get some kind of award? The elder blinked. No. Cheyenne let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. The researcher continued. This study will lead to further exploration of interspecies relations. However, the decision to continue is personal. His gaze shifted to Cheyenne. It is your choice. Cheyenne froze. Her choice. She had never been given a choice before. Her entire life, others had decided for her what she was worth, what she could be. But now, the decision was hers alone. She looked at Mark. His expression was open, patient. He was not expecting an answer. He was simply waiting, letting her decide for herself. Cheyenne took a deep breath. She stepped forward. I wish to continue. The room fell silent. Then, slowly, the elder nodded. Then so it shall be. A weight lifted from Cheyenne's chest. For the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path, and it led somewhere she had never expected. Mark gave her a small smile. Well, he said, guess we're making history. Cheyenne met his gaze, and for the first time, she smiled back. Guess we are. A new beginning had arrived, and this time, she was ready for it.